Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show for curious people who are willing to think for themselves. My name's Nigel Howitt, and on the show today, it's a great pleasure to welcome back Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman is a medical doctor from New York. He's a key spokesman, I suppose you could say, for the health freedom movement, and he's helping to build or construct an entirely new health paradigm with his work and research. A new health paradigm based on reason, facts, evidence, and logic. Dr. Kaufman, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Kaufman, I've been following your conversations with Alexander Raskovich and with keen interest on the subject of epistemology. And I'm looking forward to discussing this as a means for the ordinary person to really find out what's true, because I think we'd all agree that it's an essential part of life, but never more so than in the current context, for people to be able to validate their knowledge and question things and determine what's real and what isn't. So on this subject of epistemology, first thing I wanted to propose to you is this. You personally have unveiled for us a lot of the inversion that has been the medical paradigm. Through your work and presentations, a lot of us have come to see how upside down and back to front medicine and the understanding of health and disease really is. I believe you've studied philosophy in your education. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but I wonder if you could comment on the idea that also philosophy, that mother of all sciences, has also been very much inverted and corrupted. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely. And, let me say that I only studied philosophy in a formal way in university for just one introductory course, where we looked at the mind-body problem, ethics, existentialism, and a very little smattering of logic. So this is something that I've encountered throughout my career and my sort of autodidactic process that has led me down different paths. And one experience I had that was really instrumental was when I was in my psychiatry residency at Duke University. And we had this senior seminar in our final year where the former chairman of the department, a kind of famous psychiatrist, would meet with us once a month and we would read books and discuss various books. And so he would assign us, and he actually bought them for us. And one of the books was from an author named Niall McLaren or Jock McLaren from Australia. And I believe it was called Humanizing Madness. But essentially, what it did was it was a critique of modern biological reductionist psychiatry, right, where you say basically you reduce a mental health problem into a molecule that's deficient, right, like serotonin or dopamine. And then you give essentially a materialist treatment, right, a chemical that changes that other chemical that the problem is reduced to. So he was very critical of that, but then explored the philosophy underlying that, right, essentially materialist reductionism, and showed how that was not correct, and that we have to assume that there is a non-physical aspect or a dualist perspective, or at least a new version of the dualist perspective. And this is something that has subsequently recurred for me quite a bit, because I've now explored, for example, some of the historical experiments in physics, which also show how the non-material aspect, for example, the ether, which was, long accepted since the ancient wisdom of alchemy, and it was incorporated into the work of some very famous scientists like Maxwell and Maxwell's equations, for example. And then suddenly, in the early 20th century, Einstein canceled that out, and that was kind of an initiation of materialism into the physical sciences as the predominant paradigm. And that, of course, has led to a lot of misunderstanding and logic fallacy. But the first time I thought clearly about epistemology was during an experience when I was running a startup medical device company. And it was a device that was aimed at reducing suicides in jails and hospitals. And I had a advisor who was already like a successful tech entrepreneur, and he, was independently wealthy from that, but he wanted to be in the community and help other people. And so he was an excellent advisor, and every day we would, first thing in the morning we would have a meeting to see where we're at, and the first thing he would always say is, all right, now we got to figure out what things are things. And it really stuck with me because what he's saying really is, let's discuss the epistemology of your enterprise. And it's a very, very important thing because you can see in the current climate of the pandemic and all of the confusion about, this alleged new illness and the tests for it and the complications of it and the need for vaccines and all of this, right? It doesn't actually get to what things are things. You have to go deeper to the base layer, the root cause, right? Where if they say, in my opinion, it has to do with the discovery of the virus because everything is built upon the existence and the claim that that particle causes a disease. And everything else is reasoned on top of that. So you can't actually evaluate or discuss any of those issues. So you can't really have a discussion about a test, about therapeutics, about diagnosis, about any of those things until you first go to that base layer and say, okay, is this thing real? And is it shown by the scientific method to cause the disease in question? Because the scientific method is a very powerful tool and it's very simple. We all learn about it in about second or third grade, even in compulsory schooling in the United States. And it's simply a way to observe a phenomenon in nature like an illness, for example, or a storm or a volcano or the growth of a plant, right? Anything you see that you can observe that happens in nature, it's a way to determine what the cause of that thing is. By doing a special experiment, with a control, you have a hypothesis, like everybody is kind of familiar with this. But what we see if we look at viruses, for example, or just starting with this particular virus, we see that they didn't actually follow the scientific method in their experiments.
Yeah.
So they haven't really offered any actual proof of even the existence of this unique, allegedly disease-causing particle, and so that is the the kind of root that you have to get to when you're looking at these issues that are going on in society. You have to think, okay, let me start with the epistemology. What's the actual thing going on here? I need to dig down deep to the bottom, and find out, and then what is that thing real?
Yeah, I get what you're saying with the materialism, as you said at the beginning there. It sort of denies the existence of consciousness in the equation, doesn't it?
It doesn't deny the existence of consciousness, but what it does is it explains consciousness as what has been called an emergent property. So in other words, if you have the right mix of matter, of material, that just gives rise to consciousness. But without the material, there's no consciousness.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's where now in non-living beings, right? There's no consciousness according to materialism. And that consciousness can't influence matter.
Well, I mean, this is interesting because you've we're talking epistemology here, but maybe we can also, sort of go sideways, if you like, epistemology being one of the foundational subjects of philosophy, along with metaphysics, metaphysics being the study of reality, what is real. And these two subjects, for listeners that don't know, constitute the base of philosophy. And
Right.
the
Any area that you discuss in philosophy, you start with epistemology,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
right?
But interestingly, I mean, maybe you could comment on this, Andy, that one's metaphysics has a huge bearing on one's epistemology. So if we, for a moment, just sidestep to metaphysics, the essential question of metaphysics is reality an objective absolute? On the one hand, that would be, we could call that the primacy of existence. And then on the other hand, the only other option, does consciousness create reality? Is reality some kind of projection or creation of consciousness? And in logic, these two possibilities, these two options, if you like, exhaust the possibilities. But interestingly, both of these options result in vastly different epistemologies. And the scientific method, the recognition of reality, of facts, of A is A, rests very firmly on the side, very obviously, on the side of reality being an objective absolute. Whereas it's very popular these days. There are many ideas that are held and exchanged and talked about in all sorts of circles that implicitly rest upon the premise that consciousness creates reality. So we've got this, depending on one's metaphysics, they lead into a specific epistemology.
Right. Now,
So
Nigel, I just want to clarify what your meaning of reality is here, because I think what your meaning is like the nature of the cosmology of, the nature of our observation of matter and the properties within, but not necessarily our own destiny or our own ability to through our conscious effort, change our own individual reality or history or path, but you're talking about the everything
yes,
around us and all of the rules that we,
yeah.
have to conform to, things like, gravity or physical barriers.
Yeah, I would say that reality is the totality of existence. I think that sums it up quite simplistically. And when we talk about creating a consciousness being, the primacy of consciousness, um, this tends to, well, let me just back up just a little bit. So, so if we look at these two metaphysics options, the recognition of facts of objective reality, the totality of existence, gives rise to the scientific method. But on the premise of consciousness being in supremacy, if you like, creating reality, we whether it be human, whether it be divine, or any consciousness, you necessarily come up against a brick wall because reality would therefore not be knowable, and this has been. These ideas have been espoused since Immanuel Kant in the late 1700s, as you may be familiar. And when I hinted earlier at the fact that philosophy has been corrupted, I do point the finger at Immanuel Kant and his critique of pure reason, and ideas that picked up by Hegel and led to Marxism, which very much reject the concept of an absolute, as reality being an objective absolute. And of course, if reality is not an objective absolute, if it's a fluid thing that can be created or influenced or changed, brought into existence by consciousness, well, then by definition, its knowability is deeply questionable. And it also seems to suggest that if consciousness is creating reality, then the source of the creation would be found by introspection, looking into one's consciousness. And I think I'd be interested in your comments on this. I think it's fair to say that this idea, which has very much taken root and dominates modern philosophy, the rejection of reality being an objective absolute, and that consciousness is key, it very much leads to emotions as being considered means to knowledge. And here we are talking about epistemology, the means of discerning knowledge and the study of knowledge. And a key consequence of the consciousness creates reality metaphysics leads us, a lot of people, has led, I think, our culture largely down the path of looking to emotions to find truth. Do you think there's could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there is ideally a fine balance because, I believe emotions do provide information. It's just not the kind of information to make your world views from. Like they provide information to take your toes off the hot sand, right? When you feel pain in the bottom of your foot. And it is important to know that. And then there's
Sorry,
also,
wouldn't that be a sensation as opposed to an emotion?
yes, but you can have emotional pain that is also contains information like to change the nature of your toxic relationship, for example, or to change your addictive behavior, right? So emotions can provide information and they can help you make practical decisions in your life, but they don't tell you objectively about reality, right? And that's kind of
Absolutely.
what you're getting at. And there's a lot of authority figures who use emotions to manipulate people to believe certain information that's false, right? And we see that's a major tool of manipulation. But overall, the metaphysics that you're talking about, I think the most detrimental consequences have to do with the cultural relativisms. So moral relativism, right? Or even the relativism of truth, that there is not an objective truth about the nature of reality, right? So when it comes to the cause of disease, then, right,
Hmm.
there's not a truth about what causes a disease. It could be different for, depending on who's looking at the problem or how they want to manipulate the situation.
Indeed.
So moral relativism allows you to conduct immoral acts and that are less immoral than other ones and call it moral.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because all kinds of relativism effectively deny the fact that reality is an objective absolute. They all do. And the interesting thing is, we can talk about ideas that are implicit and explicit, but I think it's very, very important for especially us truth seekers and campaigners and advocates for freedom to very consciously stand on the premise that reality is an objective absolute. Because if we don't have a concept of truth. Truth is a concept that pertains to statements, of course, but it points to, or rather, a truthful statement is one that correlates with reality. Now,
Yeah.
if we're all on the premise that reality is not a fixed, firm absolute, which is unaffected by consciousness, divine, individual, or anything, unless we stand firmly on that premise, we have abandoned the concept of truth effectively, and this is one of my concerns as a passionate truth seeker, and freedom advocate, that a lot of people that I hear within the movement championing freedom also espouse ideas that they seem to be unaware that these ideas are rooted in the opposite metaphysics.
Correct.
So they're contradicting themselves, and I think this is a very, very serious situation for the truth movement. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is so it's good and bad in a way, right? Because as people start to uncover the truth about reality, they often, take steps and go down a path, and some go deeper than others. And as they go down that path, they're going to uncover some of these philosophical and cultural, errors, you could call them, or traps, perhaps. But there's major indoctrinating influences promoting these shifts. Like right now, for example, we have a big promotion of collectivism. Now they're calling it different things. Like one of the buzzwords is pro-sociality. So you can see policy statements coming down from international organizations, for example, and even published in the scientific literature. I believe there is a piece in the Lancet talking about the effectiveness of a communist authoritarian government at increasing pro-sociality, which really means doing what you're told. But it's sold as this collectivist philosophy that the good of the collective, which is ill-defined, is more important than the welfare of the individual. So, in other words, give up your own rights in order to advance the collective, whatever that is, and you can see how that is highly manipulable. So,
Yeah.
this is, one of the main battles that's sort of being facing. That if you can see the absolute truth of this situation, you'll see how collectivism is simply a trap. Because if we all act in our own individual best interest, that includes taking care of others who are part of our community, who play a role. Either we have an obligation as family to them, or they provide something else, right? Even providing the ability to learn how to take care of another is a valuable offering, right? That someone who may be unable themselves will, that it there's a clear reason for individuals in an individualist community to support that person, that there doesn't need to be a sacrifice of the individual's welfare, for this purpose.
Yeah.
But we are so programmed to think about things through, all of the very salient mechanisms, right? Through consumerism, compulsory schooling, through popular media, including TV, movies, as well as music and fashion, etc. Right?
Indeed. I mean, our whole, sorry, forgive me for interjecting, but our whole culture is awash with ideas which are,
That's right.
you could say, propagandist, but they all filter down from the intellectuals. They all ultimately come from the philosophers and the intellectuals who have, I believe, perpetrated, the mother of all inversions, if you like, when you go back to Kant, in this, reality not being real, things not being things. Because when we talk about the collective, the group, the society, these collective nouns, they don't actually they don't actually refer to any existent things. Like the individual is the unit of humanity, and it stops there.
Right.
So part and parcel of this inversion and this questionable metaphysics is that it results in the dupe of collectivism, because the idea that an individual should be sacrificed to the group effectively, um, is a nonsense when the individual is humanity. All
That's right.
humanity is a number of individuals. So to sacrifice the individual, or indeed to argue against individualism in any way, and for groupism or socialism, collectivism, is already an inversion of reality. We're into falseness there straight away, aren't we?
That's right. And, it just occurs to me as you're describing that in our corporate culture, we really already have a collectivist situation. Because right now, and you said the collective doesn't actually exist as an entity, right? Because it's just a group of individuals. And the same thing is true with a corporation. However, what the corporation does in its actions, right, is, for example, poison people. And that includes its own members, right? So it's acting towards to its own sacrifice or detriment, for the now maybe for a profit motive rather than for the greater good. But the greater good is just a cover story anyway. There's always a selfish motivation by whoever is making the decisions for the collective. So because of all these influences, you have very few men and women who are trying to study philosophy and logic and see through, these agendas that have their base in this academic work. Like you're saying, and philosophy is also not very approachable because of the language, the density of the reasoning,
And the
and of
corruption.
course, yes, and the corruption. I mean, look at a book like Daniel Dennett's book on consciousness. I don't recall the exact title. But essentially, and it's trying to explain consciousness from a materialist perspective. And all it is one circular argument after another. It's really amazing that it was even published.
Yeah. I mean, I think things like trying to explain consciousness is frankly irrelevant. I think we need to start with existence exists and consciousness is conscious. And that's really how the basis of all human knowledge. So, I mean, if we come back to epistemology, we need the scientific method that you mentioned earlier is rooted and stands on the premise that things are what they are, the law of identity, the Aristotelian law of identity, you could say, and this the epistemological corollary of the law of identity, which is of course a metaphysical statement that things are what they are. The epistemological corollary is that contradictions don't exist. And here we have the base of logic. Here we have the root of all, the method, if you like, for gaining human knowledge. We all know that contradictions don't exist. It's obvious in our direct experience. A thing is what it is, and it can't be what it's not. And I think it's worth mentioning to truth seekers that really perhaps the guiding principle for epistemology is the fact that contradictions don't exist. And so that with that principle in mind, of course, when we gather information and we hear various conflicting claims that this disease is caused by that or what have you, we can bring together all of the viewpoints, all of the claims, all of the arguments, and we can resolve the conflict, the contradiction. And this is the essence of finding truth, in my view. Maybe you can comment on that. But we need to gather all of the information, and with that single principle that contradictions don't exist, which is rooted in the law of identity, we can then proceed to resolve them. So we can obviously
Right. So,
research into
Nigel,
things.
this is exactly how I came to the conclusion that a disease-causing viruses don't exist, because of this contribution. Because it's said that they are abundant in nature, and that when they invade the body and cause disease, they multiply, right, in vast quantities in order to destroy the tissue and cause the disease. Right? And then the contradiction is they can't actually find them in the diseased tissue.
Yeah, I mean, it's nonsense,
And
isn't it?
correct. Correct. So, based on that contradiction, you can say it doesn't exist in nature, because otherwise there wouldn't be a contradiction, right?
Indeed.
Based on what you just said. So that's really as simple as it is. Now, it's hard to read that paper and understand the experiment, because just like in philosophy, they use very coded language, right? And so I think really the only thing that I've really contributed is I've just translated that scientific language into plain English, and so that you can see the contradiction.
Yeah. So what about things like so in your research, where you very helpfully adjusted things for a lot of people with regards to this medical paradigm of the pathogenic microbe. If we're questioning, does this thing exist or does it not? Has it been isolated? Can we prove its existence? Again, I say we're standing very firmly there on the premise that reality is an objective absolute. Do you think, to be consistent, we have to be careful with other things we discuss? Like here's one as an example. People talk about mind, body, and spirit. They talk about this trilogy. I prefer to think of body and spirit. Body and mind, and use spirit as an interchangeable term for the mind, for the human consciousness. But many people use that term to imply an existence somewhere else, a religious or mystical realm beyond reality, for which there's no evidence or proof. So, if, as scientifically minded people, we are demanding proof and evidence in one area, must we also not be completely consistent across all of our thinking with other ideas that tempt people to entertain things that aren't real? I mean, if there's no proof for Father Christmas, there's no proof for a supernatural deity. Do you think we have to be careful talking about these ideas and at the same time demanding proof?
Well, there's different aspects of your existence. And there are some things, right, that absolutely you have to always apply strict principles, right? Like when you're trying to understand the nature of reality, as we're often talking about. But you can also, have different types of experiences that might give information about things that might not be common day, might not just be with the five senses. And so to look at that information like it's, of course, not of the same quality as a scientific observation, but it can, like, we need to have, in order to reach our potential, we need to have meaning. And we might be able to derive or interpret meaning from our individual experiences that may not be 100% provable in reality, but it still serves useful within our individual lives, and it doesn't necessarily have to make us ignore reality in other important areas, right?
Isn't that a
But is it?
contradiction?
I'm trying to think about how this would play out in an actual example, because there's also there are many things that we don't know about reality. So you could come up with hypotheses about that you can think about, and that can provide a useful exercise for you. But you can still acknowledge that this is something that I feel, but it's not something that I can say is an objective part of reality, because and it may be unknowable, or it may not, like with the scientific method, for example, you can't apply that to every question. It's difficult to design experiments for certain things, and
But
there have been.
we can have a standard of rational argument, proof, and logic, and
Absolutely.
evidence. I mean, and if we are prepared to accept an idea without any evidence or any conceivable proof on one hand, and yet over here we're demanding proof and evidence, isn't that a contradiction? I don't understand what
Well,
things we can accept
right, what
on that basis.
what do you constitute as evidence? Like, for example, if you have a vision where you observe something, would that be considered evidence? Or is that, because in a materialist view, right, that would just be simply produced by an error in the material functioning that caused a, disturbance. But what if, like, I think that one hypothesis I have, that I think there probably is a way to prove this using the scientific method, but it hasn't been done satisfactorily, although there is some inferential evidence from Luc Montagnier's experiment. And this actually comes from one of the contradictions that's in biology. And the contradiction is that it's said that all proteins are made by genes, right, genetic material. But the contradiction is that there aren't enough genes for the number of proteins in a human being. So that can't be the case. So one could ask, where does the information come from? Well, we know that there are various electromagnetic frequencies and signals that occur in nature. So one hypothesis is, could one of those signals, like, for example, the Schumann resonance, right, which comes from the Earth, could that signal contain information to code proteins? Right now, I don't think anyone's done the experiment, but that is certainly a reasonable and testable hypothesis that you could come up with, right? And then, but then if you did that experiment and it found out to be true, you'd have to say, well, okay, what's causing these resonances, frequencies to be transmitted? Right? Because that's really the source of the information. And you can, go further down this road to try to prove these things, but it may not occur in your lifetime. There may not be the technology. But we do have, like I mentioned, the experiments from Luc Montagnier that showed that by an unknown mechanism, that if you have a genetic sequence near another beaker that just has the building blocks of a genetic sequence, that it will actually form the same sequence as in the first beaker under certain conditions, right? So that there is some transfer of energy outside of the material realm, I mean, information, sorry, outside of the material realm that we can't explain, but we observed it. And there are many other, phenomenon like that.
Yeah. When you say outside the material realm, are you talking of something mystical there, or just some unknown phenomena that we as yet don't understand? Because
Yeah,
I think
well,
it's
it doesn't have to be, a any electromagnetic wave is non-material,
okay, but that
right?
doesn't
It's just
imply any.
a
Yeah, yeah. That does.
vibration of the ether. But it doesn't imply anything supernatural. But there are, observations of properties that individual humans have that most would consider to be supernatural, like remote viewing, for example. And that was, done in a program out of Stanford University that was funded by the government, and where individuals were able to essentially see remote parts of the Earth far away from where they were, and see information in real time. And this was, used in some recovery operations. Like, for example, there was a plane carrying sensitive information that went down somewhere in North Africa, and they had like a several 100-mile radius of where it went down. They didn't have exact coordinates. And back in California, they put up maps, geographic or topographic maps of the whole like circumference where they thought it could be. And they had several individuals do this procedure, and one of them pointed right to a spot, and then an aircraft went there and they found the wreckage, right? So now we don't have any ability to explain exactly how that works, but we know it's reproducible and people can learn the technique and it's within our abilities. But to our mainstream knowledge, it seems supernatural and unbelievable. And there are many phenomena like this. So these experiences have to count as true observations, as well as, just as well as we can say that a pencil is heavier than a feather by taking them in our hands and feeling, the downward pressure from both. That's different, right? Even though we don't have explanations for those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that there are well, there are obviously a lot of things that are currently unexplainable. I personally have walked on hot coals and can't explain how I didn't burn my feet, and I've had a number of experiences like that. But I think there's always a danger, I'm not saying for you personally, Andy, but there's a danger for the majority of people to leap to supernatural explanations. And I think it's very useful to sort of create a mental file folder, if you like, marked unknown, unknown at the moment, unknown as yet, or unknown by me, um, and put these phenomena in there rather than attribute,
But you'd have to include some very common things in there, like rain. You know that no one knows what causes the water in clouds to come down as rain,
yep, well,
right?
I'd put
And
in,
that's not considered supernatural, but it has no explanation, and it is pretty really supernatural that
yeah,
just water comes out of the sky. If you haven't experienced it all your life, and lived in the desert, and then suddenly you had that experience when you were 25 years old, you'd think it was also supernatural, just like if frogs came out of the sky, right? Suddenly, which I think has happened in the plagues of the ancient Hebrews in Egypt, right? But we would observe that and think it was supernatural. So it's kind of like it's hard to say what really supernatural is, but it
Well,
certainly when you put
I
that
would say that
when you
it's
let me just finish. If you
okay.
put
Sorry.
that term on any phenomenon, you render it in the false category, right? So you kind of it's a dismissive term, right? When some of these types of things are, they're certainly real.
Absolutely, I'd be the first to agree that observed phenomena are real, and I wouldn't want anyone to interpret anything I'm saying here to the contrary, and maybe that box marked unknown has to be rather large box as you're indicating, but still the point that I'm trying to get at is that if we if we allow our mental categorization of what we know and what we don't to drift into the fanciful and the supernatural, we're actually compromising our own thinking, and particularly as truth seekers, again, we're undermining implicitly that concept of truth. Do you think that a clear distinction needs to be made?
Well, I think you're trying to get me to concede an atheist point of view as the only rational one. But when it comes to answering the question or asking the question, it's like, how did this reality come to be in existence? I don't think you can have an answer that you can defend in any way, because what would you say that by a materialist or an atheist explanation, what would it be?
Well, again, do we need an explanation? And
Well,
let's
how
let's
do it's very, why would we not want to know the origin of the existence that we have? Like, you don't
yeah.
want to know why the sun is in the sky?
Yes, absolutely. All questions are valid, and humans should pursue all knowledge. But it's a logical fallacy, I would propose, particularly with existence. It's a common logical fallacy for people to assume that existence needed a beginning and it needs a creator. I mean, these to me seem quite obviously logical fallacies, along with the
So
idea.
where does it come from then? How can
Well,
you explain something without a beginning?
this is the logical fallacy. An inability to explain it doesn't mean that it came from anywhere. It doesn't explain anything. But also, why would existence actually need a beginning? Because if we think in terms of cause and effect and all the emergence of things within reality, within the universe, whether it's something made by man or whether it's an oak tree growing out of an acorn, cause and effect seems to be the way that that reality works. But we can all easily grasp that if we had nothing, if you can, literally a zero, no thing, that can't possibly be the cause of something. And if one demands, or if one imagines that existence needed a beginning, then that's a logical fallacy, because it would require something outside of existence to make existence into being. I mean, do you follow any of that, or do you think that's not true, not the case?
Well, I mean, there is somewhat of a paradox here that you're describing, right? Because what we have in the materialist view is exactly that something came from nothing, right? That's what the Big Bang theory, which is, completely irrational theory. It is, but isn't it possible that this existence came from a different existence? Right? I mean, because this existence has a certain right truth of its reality, but there could be other existences with different realities that there's no way to know. Like I'm not saying I have proof. I'm just in order to have meaning in your life, there has to be some understanding of why and how, in order for you to decide, what to do, how to be.
Yeah.
how to conduct your life. I mean, there are some things that might be kind of instinctive, but those are not enough to sustain one to their maximum potential. And so there has to be some, conception about origins in there and the nature of reality and the purpose of this, embodiment that we're experiencing, or at least a way to create that purpose out of that other knowledge. So I think it's one of the most important questions to ponder, realizing that you may uncover the answer through some kind of personal experience or some kind of acquisition of the knowledge at some point. Maybe it would even be after your death. There's some interesting research from hypnosis about people's, reporting about past life experiences. And, even though, once again, it seems a bit outside the realm of science, there's actually validity in it because there's so many different individuals who describe the same things under hypnosis, even though they know nothing about each other or what anybody else described. And so, so there is information to draw on. And, I've had personal experiences during meditation where I have felt, the presence of another consciousness. And I don't know what that was, but it did communicate information to me in a way that actually helped me learn from my experience and grow and develop, further as an individual, that allowed me to look at, these difficult issues in the basic epistemological ways using logic and such. And I keep, and that's really what I call the spiritual aspect. It's the part of myself that ponders those questions that may be unanswerable or unknowable and derives meaning for the context to do all of my other work in life. So when I, work with clients, for example, because I do talk about the three parts of the individual, right? The body, mind, and spirit, or I call it psycho-spiritual health, because I consider those aspects like existential crises, for example, which is related to that pondering of those, big mysteries, right? And in the, they call them the mystery schools, right, of the many of these ancient esoteric philosophers, because they look at these things as the mysteries and they don't necessarily have all the answers, but the pursuit of it is what allows the advancement and the meaning to be derived. And then maybe, at some point you would have an experience which would give you more understanding of the nature of those questions that seem unanswerable, in our current embodiment.
Mm. Yes, I mean, I would have to say that I can't see there's any room for more than one existence. If we say that existence exists, meaning the totality, everything that exists, logically speaking, there can't be another one. I mean, again, that seems like a logical fallacy to
Right, but
me.
you haven't been everywhere in reality, right?
But
So
the actual term or the phrase "all of existence," I am designating everything that exists. So therefore, if there's another existence, then that would surely be within that designation.
So maybe what I really meant is that you would exist in another realm that's part of this existence that you have yet to experience.
Okay, well, I mean, again, if somebody could present some evidence and some proof for that, or
Right. Well,
something credible. Yeah.
into the work of Michael Newton,
Mm,
who collected all of those
yeah,
hypnosis sessions, and see what you think about that.
yeah. Well, this sort of brings me back to the idea that philosophy has been corrupted, and uh, th- I think um, a lot of the what I would call mystical ideas, ideas that can't be proven, ideas for which there is no evidence, We have to bear in mind a parallel between epidemiological studies, which you and I know are not evidence for things. They're generally the basis for a further study, an interventional controlled double-blinded study. So a lot of
Well,
the
they are evidence. They're just not evidence for you can
they're
only
not
use it
conclusive proof.
to draw certain conclusions.
Yeah,
Like you can tell how many people died. Is the death rate increasing or decreasing, provided the records are collected accurately, of course. But that it does provide evidence for that. But it doesn't provide evidence of why people are dying, only that they are dying.
yeah. So do you consider the law of non-contradiction at the base of your epistemology? I mean, I'm keen to find out what yours is, because you seem, and I don't mean any disrespect at all. Of course, I have immense respect for you and all of your work, Andy. But are you sort of part mystic? Because I'm, I'm keen
Well,
to.
I'm entitled to have, beliefs in addition to my scientific opinions.
Absolutely,
So,
of course.
I apply strict logic and epistemology to any, scientific opinions that I have, and that's principally what I speak about. But if I didn't have my spiritual beliefs, I would have no motivation to analyze any scientific principles. And
Okay.
so for me, I need both aspects of the self, right? And when I, am in relationships with people and conduct my interpersonal affairs, I don't think about it the same way as when I think about what do I do to improve my health? How do I, understand nature better? Right? So I think it's really about having different aspects of your life. Just like when I, am going to exercise, right? I don't necessarily think about any of those things at all. I may think about my health a little bit, but I'm not analyzing the research literature on exercise. I just want to feel stronger. Right? I enjoy that, and it gives me more energy,
Yeah.
and that's and also an important part of my life too. Because without that energy and vitality, I would have less attention and stamina to do the analytical and logical work.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a balance of all of these things, and there's a lot of ways of looking at it, but when I can show you, for example, the evidence that certain types of healing protocols result in health improvements, right? But I know from my experience that when the individual believes that for them will make a difference, that makes a huge difference in the outcome. Right. And so, now this has been subjected to some scientific study, but it's really not explained at all. And, we could call it the placebo effect,
Yeah.
for lack of a more accurate term, because that term has a lot of negative connotations. But, so that's where, for me, conveying that sense of hope and confidence about what I'm doing comes not only from the analytical reasoning side, but also from that other believing and spiritual side. And I feel that when that resonates with other individuals, they actually do better things and have better results and outcomes that are more aligned with their goals. So I think it has an important role in individual inspiration and motivation and all the things like that. But of course, there are some people who become obsessed with that way of thinking and generalize it into trying to explain everything that way, and that is a major, error. And those people are very vulnerable
Yeah.
to being manipulated and taken advantage of.
Yes, I would certainly put the placebo effect and other things, perhaps like emotional trauma being stored in parts of the body and things like this. I'd definitely put many things like that in that box marked unknown. It's very, very interesting, and these things do need to be studied, do they? They do
Absolutely.
need to be looked at in the future.
Right. And some of the scientists that I have on my True Medicine University webinar are actually doing some research in this area, like what you just mentioned. Eileen McCusick is kind of mapped out and studied what she calls the human biofield, and she can measure it using a tuning fork. And it's quite amazing because there seems to be memories, emotional memories, stored in this field that have like a organizational structure, like the further away from the body, the earlier in the life it occurred, for example. So she can, like, by determining or detecting essentially dissonance in the tuning fork as it goes through this field, she can identify like an age and then a certain type of emotional experience. And this has been, reproduced in many people, and it fits with the field, fits with the boundaries of, the magnetic field that comes off of the individual. So she is, I have to give her a lot of credit because she came to that material somewhat through intuition, but also through studying the science that was available on the subject, and now is trying to actually use the scientific method to study this. And she's partnering with some academic scientists to make that happen. So there, you can, and Rupert Sheldrake is another individual who's taken some of these types of phenomena that are unknown and tried to subject them to, controlled experiments. At least to show that they're valid. It's not at the stage of understanding the causal mechanisms, but I think this is a major important step because these phenomenon may even have been kind of hidden from us, and maybe that's why we think they're so difficult to believe. But now that they're coming back into more of a common knowledge or experience, they can actually be subjected to this kind of analytical experiments. And we can, learn. We may not understand everything, but we can certainly learn a lot more of them, and they can be very useful tools for a variety of purposes. Communication not being the least unimportant.
Yeah. Well, it's great that these things are being studied. I commend that. You mentioned purpose earlier, and by way of balance, I think you were suggesting that the mystical was a means of fueling purpose. I mean, I find as somebody I don't accept any supernatural deity. But I find that life can be very purposeful, pursuing freedom and human flourishment, and in pursuing my own happiness in my life and for that of my family is an all-encompassing purpose. It gives great sense of purpose. I would dispute that other things, supernatural things or whatever, are required in order to give life meaning and purpose. But maybe that's a topic for another debate, another time. Just to come back to epistemology, and unless you wanted to respond anything to that, Andrew.
Well, I mean, I don't, there are many ways that you can derive purpose, but, the cultural and influences that we've been talking about and been critical of are really, trying to promote decadence and nihilism as, essentially life without meaning and purpose, or only for the purpose of, getting as many thrills as possible, right? And this is, of course, resulting in a lot of the decay that's going on, including the ignorance about these issues of logic and epistemology that we're discussing.
Yeah.
So it's more of a way of counteracting, those forces. But, I don't think it's required to, believe in God or any other type of deity in order to derive meaning of life. It can be from your relationship with nature, with your family, many things. But it has to be an important thing to find that purpose and meaning. And I could just say that is one way of defining your spiritual path. It doesn't have to be demarcated by any deities necessarily, but it has to derive meaning and purpose for the individual and a path to develop themselves to achieve that and to, kind of be worthy in a way,
Yeah.
maybe worthy of just reaching all the goals that you have, or of, preparing the next generation to do as well or better than you have in your life.
Yeah.
And freedom and responsibility and obligation are definitely, those are, I mean, I have those things provide meaning for me, especially in terms of my responsibility for my children.
Yeah. So just coming back to epistemology, then let's just return to the subject of emotions. Um, the idea stemming from reality is not an objective absolute, which is implicit, I think, in many religious doctrines, but the idea that that leads on to people looking to their feelings for to find knowledge. You alluded earlier that there are some areas where that's legitimate. I wanted to just point out that if we're predisposed to listen to our feelings, considering them a means to knowledge, as opposed to A is A, the law of identity, and contradictions don't exist, and the whole scientific method where we dissect ideas and we question assumptions and we find truth based on an objective reality. If we're in this follow your emotions camp, it renders us very susceptible to emotional propaganda. This is one of the key means by which populations are manipulated, because they get scared, that they can be frightened, and when you're in your emotional, following your emotions, you listen to your emotions. They're a source of truth, one believes, and hence you're manipulated. And there are a number of other problems with the habit of listening to one's emotions
Right.
in
So
times.
Nigel, if I may correct myself, so um, I didn't mean to say to follow your emotions like that. Just do what they say. But I do think, and based on experience of myself and others, that emotions contain information, but you have to interpret and
Yeah,
check that information. Because, like, so let's say that is the situation, right, where you're watching CNN all the time and they're saying all of the scary stuff that's going to happen, and you start to feel that fear, and then you start to believe something really bad is going to happen, right, which is false. Um, you could realize that. You say, "Oh my gosh, I realize that this fear only happens right after I watch the news. When I'm going about my day or taking a walk in the woods, I don't feel it," right? And then you can interpret it correctly. So it's very important to consider carefully what the information is that the emotion is conveying, and you can use logic to discern that.
yeah,
And then you can take that information in the context of other knowledge that you have, and see how it may or may not be useful.
yeah,
So, for an example, for me, when I was going through a divorce, I had very intense emotion, right? Sadness that I was experiencing. And at, I was used to kind of a pattern, which is common, especially for men in our culture, to try and suppress sadness, at least from expressing it openly. And I decided to do something different in this experience, and I let myself just express that emotion, and like, not out in public, but in my own home. And it did make some family members around me a little bit uncomfortable. But what I experienced over time, and this only lasted for a period of a few weeks, was that all of that sadness was telling me that I need to approach relationships in a different way. And I didn't know exactly how. I just got that signal from it that there's something that I could do better. It's maybe better choices of who I have relationships with, how I conceive of the relationship or the exchange of value in that relationship, and that led me on a path over the next year to really work on myself and consider my faults and how I may have alienated people or drove them away or all of these kinds of things. So in that case, it was one of the most useful experiences I had, was to get that information from there. But I could see how it could easily be misinterpreted. You could interpret it as like you're an unlovable person, right? That's why everyone leaves you in relationships and you're feeling so sad, right? And then that could lead you down a dark, depressive experience, for example, or lead you into addiction or into a life of crime. So it is very careful to not just assume, oh, if I'm afraid there's something scary and I better hide, right? That would be like blindly following the emotions. But I'm talking about just acknowledging that, and I think this is actually a part of nature that we've lost touch with. And I talk about this a lot in my sort of healing philosophy, that our bodies give us all kinds of information, not just through emotions, but also various bodily sensations and other things that we have pretty much learned to ignore. Like even something simple like thirst. When I ask people about how they know when they're thirsty, what they're really telling me is they're giving me the signs that they're dehydrated, right? And they didn't even observe the thirst signal. Or when people have developed a really serious life-threatening illness, and I ask them about, go back a few years and what was going on with your health, and they had all of these things going wrong with their health, that their body was giving them a signal, do something, do something, and they just ignored it. They said, oh, it's just aging. Oh, there's nothing I can do about it, these kinds of things. And so, what I try to teach is to get back in touch with that basic information. And that actually, I think, sometimes can be helpful for your discernment as well, right? Because you might get like a little tingling on the back of your neck when something is not quite logical. And then you might say, oh, I have to think about that some more. And those subtle signals, and I don't know what, where they come from or how. This is another, would be a fascinating topic to do research. But I do feel that through all of these mechanisms, that you are getting a lot of feedback information that it would be very useful if you learn how to pay attention to it and interpret it accurately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think emotions are wonderful things. I wouldn't want anything I've said to be misinterpreted, and I didn't mean to misrepresent you there, Andy. Forgive me.
No, that's
Um,
okay, because I have concerns about people just following their emotions blindly as well.
yeah, yeah,
I'm seeing lots of turmoil and suffering from that.
yeah. Emotions are wonderful things. They are the means by which we enjoy life. Without them, we wouldn't enjoy life. But there are grave dangers when people, and I think there's a big cultural predisposition to do this, is to consider emotions as tools of cognition, as means of knowing reality. And we've been propagandized with this for ages. I remember as a kid watching Star Trek, and the Captain Kirk was the human emotional character, and Spock was the logical alien. So we've all had this come
I
at us.
always identified with Spock much more.
Yeah, so we've had this coming at us from all sides, the heart over the head, etc. But the problem is when people adopt this as an implicit epistemology, as an implicit means of finding stuff out and knowing things, you never actually have any reasons for the things that you hold as, well, you've only got beliefs, you haven't got convictions, because it's reasons and facts and evidence and an argument that you can grasp and understand that enables one to explain freedom, for example, explain why you shouldn't take that experimental medical treatment. And if people are emoted into, or in the in their habit of listening to their emotions, they're not going to be able to defend any of the things that they claim to know. They're not going to be able to argue for them, but they're also not going to be reachable by those who are
Right.
arguing. I mean, they say that you can't reason someone out of a position that they've emoted themselves into. And of course you
Absolutely.
can't. Of course you can't, because they're not listening to reasons. So there are a number of grave pitfalls, I would suggest. Not even to mention emotional manipulation in your personal life, things like that. But
You know, you're so right about this. It's such a key thing because this has been really the only barrier that I've ever had talking with someone about this topic, about the pandemic, whether it be in my personal life, with family members or others, or many people who probably would say they were formerly my friend. It's not been like I say, hey, let's read this paper together and discuss how, if you think this proves there's viruses, then explain it to me and maybe I'll change my mind, right? That's always the kind of discussion that I wanted to have. But the other, person on the other side has always been, like, oh, you're dividing the freedom community, right? Or, that couldn't possibly be true. And it's all this emotional because it would threaten, you know, their something about them, their identity. It would contradict the fear that they have, right? And they're identifying with that in some way. So it's really, this inability to put your emotional response or attachment aside when dealing with an issue of, reason and reality, right? Because
yeah,
you mean this is, well, if you want to like have a debate about God where you can't really use logic in it, you can, get emotional, and it's fine. You're not going to harm anything, right? But no one's going to change their mind based on that. They're going to just walk away with the, same beliefs. But if you're talking about the nature of objective reality and you want to understand that, it's like you have to be able to just for a moment put the emotional response aside, right? Save that till after, and then just say, okay, what is actually known,
yeah,
right? How do we know it? What's true? What's not true? And then once we get to the point where we say, oh my gosh, this is the truth about this thing, um, you know, then you can react emotionally to that, and you will, right? Because when I first started being willing to see the reality of certain subjects in the world, or a certain phenomenon in the world. And I realized that the conclusion I had come to previously was completely off the mark. Then I did have an emotional response, and it was, I felt foolish, I felt duped, right? And also I felt totally energized that I've got to like make sure everyone else in the world understands this truth. And of course, but they were all stuck in their emotional attachment to the lie and were unable to even have a discussion or consider the truth. And that is really that is what's preventing the nature of the last couple of years from being understood widely.
yeah.
It is the emotional attachment to, my grandmother is died or is at risk of dying, and we all need to protect her. And if I don't do it, it's going to be the end of the world.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the practice of putting the emotion aside while you deal with something, and I think this is so important because again, a habit of people who are predisposed to follow their emotions as tools of cognition rather than their rational faculty, and so forth, is that when the sort of the shit hits the fan, when we're under emotional stress, when people are dying, it's very, very easy to just go to pieces. Because again, if you're in the habit of focusing on your emotions, they will be taking center stage in your consciousness, and you won't be able to get it out of the way to think, right, what needs to be done. There are things that need to be done whenever there are crises, whenever there are people, if you attended an accident and someone had their leg hanging off or something, it wouldn't be appropriate to get emotional about that. You'd need, somebody needs to act, somebody needs
Yes.
to be clean thinking. And this is, I think, one of the big dangers. We see this in the pandemic, as you say, where people are actually dying, and it's a very emotive thing, but we have to, again, with our epistemology, we have to get it into facts, reality, logic. A is A, contradictions don't exist. We have to know that truth and planning a course of action needs to be done here, not in emotion. So emotions are great, and as you said, you can feel the emotions afterwards, and you know, but we must not allow them to inform us of what to do. It can go horribly wrong, can't it?
Absolutely.
So, by way of conclusion, Andy, do you have any, did you want to say anything else about perhaps epistemological principles or guidance for the truth seeker? Anything else that can help the curious mind who wants to think for itself, to help that person um, discern through the propaganda, the misinformation, the mistakes, the lies, etc.?
Well, I think that it requires some practice to kind of shift your way of thinking and approaching topics using this kind of a technique. So, one thing that may, kind of help you get there is to just adopt skepticism. So that any time you hear an opinion or information in a discussion in a news story from an official government source, just start asking yourself the question is that really true, and how would I find out? And that will get you started on looking at this issue. And then when there's something that's of particular interest to you or that you feel is important, consequences in your life, take that opportunity to try and go down deep and start with the epistemology of the topic and see where that takes you. And I promise that once you have this experience where you, as an individual on your own, get drill down to the bottom of something and ask those important questions about what is what, you're going to feel, a sense of accomplishment and pride and confidence in now your understanding of that issue that you haven't had before. And I think that's going to motivate you to go on further. And, like for me, I'm at the point now where everything I hear, my first response is, no, that's absolutely not true. Now, even if it is, because then I want to go and either put it on my list or immediately look for the answers about that. And of course, it's if it's related to health and biology, I pretty much immediately go looking for the answers if it's at all possible. So really, just start with skepticism.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very important to be skeptical, particularly, I mean, of ideas in the mainstream, particularly ones that have political consequences. I think whenever you hear an idea that invokes your fear, the climate is changing drastically, and we've all got to stop living and breathing. I think whenever we hear things that invoke fear, particularly, and also have political consequences for our freedom, and that takes a little bit of mental digging to uncover the implications of a particular news story or
Right.
pronouncement. So I think I always take those two,
Yes,
and then
there are many clues like that. Also, when dictionaries or other authorities change the meaning of words,
yes,
and often there are inversions of meanings of words, right? Like even a word like racism used to mean, and you can go back and look at the 1828 dictionary to verify this for yourself, but it used to mean taking pride in one's race or creed. So, like an example of this would be like St. Patrick's Day parade, right? Where everyone shows off their Irish heritage and they're proud of it. So that would have been called racist, but in a positive way. And then it was really during the events leading up to World War II when that definition was changed, and racism then became a way of, discriminating or demeaning people of a race or creed or group. Uh, so that's an inversion of meaning, and then that tells you that something nefarious was going on, leading to that, and then you can look at the facts and use discernment about that.
Yep.
Just like with the V word was recently redefined in the last couple of years. Also, same thing. There's a lot to uncover there if you take that little clue to heart.
Yep.
So there are many opportunities, to take this new, deeper perspective.
Another thing to that, I will let you go in a second, but checking definitions, that's so invaluable. You've helped bring to light a lot of these inversions, and as you say, and in our process of truth seeking, checking definitions is right up there at the beginning when you've gathered all the information and you've identified contradictions. We must check definitions to know not only what we're talking about, but what all other parties in the
Yes.
conversation mean. And there are logical fallacies such as equivocation, where words can be used. A word that has multiple meanings can be used in two different senses to confuse. So they're checking
This happens
definitions.
in the law a lot.
Yes, yeah, they're experts at it. I think the whole legalese language is a double language, isn't it? So
Well, you need a separate dictionary
yeah,
for to know what the words mean in law because they do have different meanings.
yes. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. I mustn't keep you any longer. I really appreciate your contribution to helping people discern a method to know stuff. It's really important. If the truth freedom movement is to ever gather any ground, if we're to actually achieve human freedom, then we do need a method. For the ordinary person needs a method to sift through all of the propaganda and misinformation and genuine mistakes that are out there. So thank you very much for contributing towards that. There'll be a full list of contacts to all of your work on the podcast page and below the various videos that go out. Did you have anything to say in closing comments or anything you'd like to plug?
Well, please just go to my website and you can see all the events and resources and products that I have. And, it's quite extensive, actually. But I just want to say, that this is the kind of intellectual discourse that we need to be having, where we don't necessarily agree on everything, but we're willing to exchange ideas. And I feel that I have a richer understanding of the issues that we discussed today because of the having an opposing opinion. Like it makes things more clear, and this is the way science is supposed to actually make progress going forward. That a bunch of scientists come together and they would argue more vigorously. We didn't really argue, but they really need to do that because that is the process that uncovers what's really true and what is something else, like someone's ego trying to say, well, I discovered something, right, when it's actually not accurate. And so everyone out there, be willing to have these kinds of discussions and don't take it personally. Like, you can see that we're getting along just fine, and because we respect each other. And that's, if you go into it with that, where you can put your emotion aside, have mutual respect, have a vigorous discourse, be open to changing and refining your opinion, and then have a drink afterwards and lighten up.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you so much. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for listening. And I do urge you to check out the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's loads more on there. And please do join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Change you want to see.